Then we are live. I believe it's number 74, Portal Mountain Development Meeting. A series that's been going on for a couple of years now, quite some time. Putting together our model, Holonic model.
We're tanging away into trying to write books, trying to write software, trying to do this, trying to do this.
Yep.
Spreading ourselves pretty thin sometimes.
Yep. Indeed. And so lately we've been going over a software which is
It has been a rather solid project comparatively.
it's supposed to be very productive, if you will, an actual product.
It still suffers.
Result.
It still suffers from the whole single developer problem. I tend to currently burn out once in a while, and so progress is a little bit wavy, if you will. It goes up and then goes down.
Yeah. I try to do my part. I don't really know.
It's not a complaint towards anybody else.
Yeah. You're doing your part.
I've been trying to get you guys prepped for the longer haul, as it were, once it starts rolling. So you won't see me literally worrying about the lack of the way I used to gripe about before. But that's because the plan is more solid, right? Like, we have an actual direction. We have the technologies.
Oh yeah.
So to speak. Some of them are still in their beta versions. Specifically, the router I'm really holding out for. It seems to be progressing really nice. I'm on their Discord. I follow in the developers.
Oh yeah.
I see what the developers are up to.
Cool.
It's made by another group of people that really knows what they're doing.
Which package?
TanStack. So TanStack is I don't know I don't know if it's the company's brand or whatever, but TanStack has a number of packages that we're going to be using indirectly because of Refine, for example. They use their query tool. A query tool is a way to negotiate data on the front end as a cache. So that's going to be part of our system. So we're going to need to curate to it, or not curate to it, cater to it to an extent.
Yep. And it seems like we've got this whole software stack together.
Yeah.
Which seems like it's almost fully could be functional. Like,
there's a few things in beta that are currently not stable enough to utilize directly. I'm waiting very patiently. It's not a blocker for me because we're not that time constrained.
Right.
And it's like literally on the verge of being released. They've put so much work into this, and they've went back and forth on a number of different things. Should they be responsible for caching any of the data? Should they not be? Should they?
Yeah.
So, because they already had a tool, TanStack Query, it sort of materialized that their initial efforts to cache the data were unnecessary, too complicated, and they already have other tools to do the job perfectly for you. So they are basically pivoted away from what they were doing to make it better integrated together. So now that Refine is integrated with it and the router is integrated with it, we can bind the two tools together through the query tool, and it will make for a nice clean. So the I don't know how much you're aware in terms of front end to back end development, but the caching thing is a very huge problem to resolve. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to make server requests unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And you don't want to have stale data.
Yeah.
So you have to negotiate when and where in your front end you'll make the ping back to the server to get the fresh data. And that's the problem that solves.
Yeah, or just to check the data version.
Yeah. In our case, we're not going to the server. We're going to the Redux store and say, did anything change there? So we're not going from our program to the server. We're going from program to RAM. And the RAM part is going to decide whatever it needs to. And that's where the complication in our architecture starts to shine, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a front-end tool. They're both front-end tools. They're both responsible for routing and making the decision of what data it belongs to this route.
And so there's like probably 10 different software packages, it seems like,
Yeah.
all coming together.
Thankfully, with Refine, all we have to do is create a small little binder between the router and their operations, and it should just work flawlessly. Because I've double, triple, quadruple checked whether the APIs on the one end support the APIs on the other end. All of the expectations are met, and so it does seem to me that once the tool is there, we're just going to be able to integrate it, and it's just going to wire up all of that fuckery with caching in the most standard industry way possible. So, because these are solved problems, like
we don't want to reinvent the wheel.
You just want to
Like
bust a
that
cache
10
by a tag. You don't
10
wanna,
stack project
Yeah.
had to reassess what they were doing because they were just recreating something that already exists.
They created themselves to exist because
It's-
10 stack query, 10 stack router, those are the two packages that I'm interested in, and query is already used by Refine. So, the 10 stack people are already in our stack to begin with. We're just using another package that they've come up with that's better than the other packages out there for routing,
Nice.
because they thought it through for fuck's sake.
Yeah, anyway, I'm just trying to like give a
Well,
little
no,
bit
that's
of
not fair. The other routers are pretty good. They're just not what I want.
trying to give context, I guess, of what's
Yeah.
going on. So we have a software package stack
Yeah.
that's doing stuff for us that we need to be done.
Choices were very, very carefully laid out and reassessed and
It seems
I've
like
dropped things before.
there's not a lot of software out there for the whole holonic paradigm.
There's a lot of software that will either do too much or exactly not enough. And this one router, like literally, I was so awestruck by how perfectly it fit the niche I needed it to.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm so stuck on waiting for it, even though it's not ready for anything.
Yeah. So what can we do for now?
Wait.
I
assume it works.
What's
Assume it
what
works.
are we doing here right now?
Tackling the other portions that we can tackle. So anything to do. Well, let's make it a bit of a mantra.
Yeah.
So we have reduce, we have map, and we have filter. Filter, map, reduce. Those are the key functional programming terms that are going to be like
Hey, remember
the lifeblood of the way we do things.
remember at the party you were talking about how when you get into something like playing a game, you'll tend to like zero
Yeah.
in on the one leaf of a branch without coming back to the. Remember that kind of sentience discussion a bit?
Yeah, yeah.
Without coming back to the trunk.
Macro versus
So
micro.
that's what I feel like right now. I'm like kind of standing at the trunk trying to turn this into a podcast, if you will, that somebody could watch and be like, okay, I kind of get what's going on. But you keep kind of zeroing, focusing, laser focus onto this exact detail when it's like,
Because
okay,
I want it to be the
so
theme,
we've got
yeah.
this software stack. What is it even doing? Like we've already dived so deep into one specific like.
See, you okay? I can tackle the more major pieces.
Just it'd be nice to like
So-
for a context refresher,
So
if you will.
let's start.
Like, what are we even doing?
So let's start at the basic. We have like two, so to speak, orthogonal dimensions to go by. One of them being your client and server. So client being the browser, server being the server,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
like HTTP stuff, right? Then you have another division, front end and back end.
All right.
And the key to diving into any of these divisions right now is isomorphism. Here's what we want to achieve. We want to have a front end and a back end setup that can run client only, can run client server, can run server only. And by server only, I mean you utilize the browser as the thinnest possible client ever, where you only give markup and CSS back out, and everything else is goes
Yeah.
right back to the server to go do through the processing and the actual logic. So it does nothing. It's dumb, 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 dumb. That's the dumbest possible combination for a client. Flip side, you have client only, no server. So the part that takes care of the back end lives in the client. So we're talking about a native client.
Yeah.
So it writes to the file system. It does all of that stuff for you. So that's the first understanding. The overall arcing picture is that isomorphism between client and server. Oh, sorry. The isomorphism between no, I'm right. Client and server that allows for the both front end and back end to take space in either or space. Like that's the orthogonal. That's why it's two dimensions. It's not the same thing. So normally you'd think front end is client, back end is server.
Yeah.
But the back end could just the server could just be like, here, take this native application, install it, and then just run both ends yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have that.
And because we want to have flexibility of platform, of hardware available, all that kind of stuff for the ecosystem or whatever.
Yeah, this is what server and client resolves. So we are allowing ourselves that platform based on whether we have the server capacity or the client capacity. It depends on where it like how it's deployed.
Right. So anticipating that it's going to be deployed in these various different ways.
And anything in between.
We're setting up the architecture up front to be like, it doesn't matter how you're doing it. It's just all going to work.
Which is pushing the isomorphic point. That's where the isomorphism has to be a constraint. Because if you don't do that, then you have different applications running on the server versus the client.
Right.
That is exactly what I don't want to happen.
And that's doubling like the effort, wasting time, making duplicates.
I want one core and two thin layers to cover server and browser and endpoints, and then everything just manages which part goes heavily more into there and which part goes heavily more into there, and which combination this is of that in the first place, because it could actually be mixed.
Yep, cool.
Again, making isomorphism even that much more important. Like, you can't break away from it at all. It's the constraint. That brings us back to the chosen packages. So the router that I'm waiting for allows for the isomorphism, because on the server side, what I can say is, okay, this is the route you've been loaded. Preload all of my data. Okay, you've preloaded. Now generate all the markup that you need to by preloading the data for this route. So it's all static stuff. It doesn't generate dynamic web pages for you that are bound to your JavaScript. All it's saying is that I'm expected to generate a state from the route based on this data, and that data is going to feed into my markup to create the page, and the server will send that back out. So the router plays a role there by figuring out, oh, I'm loaded on this is the data, this is the full page. On the client side is, I change my route, I gotta reload, I gotta run my loaders for data for this route, change this bit of my page. So you don't do an entire round trip for the whole page, you just the parts that change. And sometimes they won't need to hit the router because the cache hasn't been busted or something. It's just gonna load it from itself. So it won't need to do any of those extra steps. So optimization before we even have an optimization strategy. Based on standards only.
Yep. And so this is for dashboard software. We can use it for describing and participating in organizations.
Well, organization being like the overarching word for, I guess, generic grouping, right? Like we're not talking about like systemic organizations. We're talking about like
not like a company, although it could be, but
I think what I'm trying to get an organic organization, not like a set in stone brick mortar stuff necessarily.
More fiat.
Yeah.
Market type stuff.
So tackling the emergent aspect of grouping rather than the top down situation.
So a social dashboard enabling you to, say, have a community garden with other people and be able to use the software to organize that.
Yeah. If you think of a community garden as a kind of conversation, and because conversations are dashboards, see how it's this, like it doesn't really stray away from being the same thing. However, it allows for extra build up, if you will, extra articulation. So this is a conversation, but it's a very constrained conversation about the garden. Because it's a very constrained conversation about the garden, it has its own dashboard, which is and the lobby represents the full going conversation. Within that dashboard, you can start mini conversations about specific topics within the specific gardening subject.
Yeah, and so talking about the garden and interacting with the garden with other people, you end up speaking within an ontological sort of framework. Like
Right.
there is now the plant, there is the garden bed, there is dirt, there is
Yeah.
the water tap. You can get the bucket, put it under the tap, pour it into the dirt. Like there's these things that become part of the language. That's
Yeah.
what's becoming a dashboard. Those protocols.
So yeah, and this hits on something I think I sort of known intuitively but failed to articulate before. We've never touched on how a dashboard will emerge out of it exists in milieu of dashboards, and this is
Yeah.
what we're touching on right there. So with something like a garden guild, right, having its own dashboard, it doesn't start off by having its own dashboard. It starts off by being in the milieu of the individual
Of other dashboards.
of individual agents within your mediation dashboard, starting to progress into an
Right.
association guild of a conversation,
But there'll be like
and that focus in the conversation will allow it to become a more permanent, ongoing conversation in terms of its own dashboard. So you can evolve a conversation into a dashboard. I don't know about the
Yes.
technical elements of this scene, but abstractly speaking, this is what would the intention of the setup would be.
so you're always operating within this milieu, as you say, of dashboards.
Right, which is why you got to get bootstrapped into one to begin with as well.
For a new one to emerge, it would come as like from being demanded from the other dashboards, something
So-
new that needs to fill a void. Or something.
All you need to do is picture a conversation that simply doesn't seem to have a natural end to itself, which would happen. Like there are some conversations that don't find it's a Turing completion problem, right? Like you literally can't code for it, so you don't know when the ending point is. Those would be like your not targets. Those would be your candidates for split out into its own dashboard. That conversation is its lobby.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what I'm saying there.
Right.
That could be like a coherence thing. Like if it's just straight up, constantly like getting more coherent and more coherent and more coherent, it might be its own context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the scenario I'm going through in my head is like kind of the garden idea, but like emerging out of like, say, a church type of organization, a spiritual community, whatever.
I'd go simpler.
Part
Like
of
you talking
I'm
to
just
your
saying
wife.
as how that community garden maybe doesn't even exist yet, but now
Right.
suddenly it does. And how that happened was there is existing agencies doing their thing, and there's a need for food, and a request comes through this dashboard or something. Like there's a
an
number
ongoing
of
conversation
things happening, and then suddenly you can say, okay, this is its own thing now.
Right, because it's like this one conversation keeps being like, oh, I need food, oh, I have space, oh, I this, and it's all the same people within the
Yeah.
same dashboard talking. Well, all of a sudden, a theme shows up within that one conversation. That's the new context. That
Right.
becomes the garden.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing before, but it emerged, and at the same
yeah,
time,
that's really neat, kind of to think about.
Yeah.
It's created, sort of.
yeah, and it follows the same idea of being bootstrapped. So it's like it doesn't come out of nowhere in existence. It comes out of existing pieces running together in a new combination.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And with that,
Yeah.
I will run a new combination.
Grab a short break.
So, like I was saying, it's pretty neat how the description of like the emergence of a guild is happening here, because it's never been really explored before. We've touched base on it will happen, but not how, right? And I think the problem for me was that I kind of like just had an intuitive vision of this that I didn't think would needed
There's another
covering.
there's another part to it, maybe a bit deeper, you could say, maybe, but that the protocols, like the emergence of protocols, don't get written down typically right away at all. It's almost always like
You throw something out into the ether. You
people
throw something
just
else out
trying
into
shit.
the ether.
Yeah,
Eventually, there's enough crap out in the ether
It's
to
like-
fabricate something.
yeah.
That's exactly how I think about the initial steps of evolution, where you have like these structures that would dissipate heat more efficiently by being able to replicate. But there's many different ways to replicate a structure. So you get this kind of replication, that kind of replication. You get all of these things, and then you get the byproducts of all of these replication outcomes. And all of a sudden, that chemistry start mixing together, and it works on the same principle, like dissipate heat, replicate, all of that stuff. So the milieu becomes like there's more garbage, if you will, to build shit from, and eventually
Yep.
it gets ordered and reordered and reordered
Yeah.
and reordered, and then you have
It is an emergence type of situation.
yeah, and then you have something that takes all of that garbage, puts it all together into one more replicating system. Then you have a cell. Roughly, Obviously, I'm just shooting the shit about that one.
Yeah.
God, these lighters suck so bad. They're the worst lighters ever. Except for all the other
How
ones.
do you like this for? Don't read the name, but likes a video you shared. Like, does that make any sense? Why would the UI be giving this word in a different language to me?
I don't know, and then not only
Does
that,
it make any sense?
not only
at
that,
all?
it's using like Cyrillic and Latin. If you notice that,
Yeah.
that's an incredibly Ukrainian locale. They're not found in like normal Russian speaking people, but Ukrainian.
Most of the letters are actually
Yeah, in Ukraine, I think Ukrainian
Roman,
and
whatever.
Polish would have both Cyrillics and Latin variations on letters. It's not a judgment call, it's just a reality.
Interesting.
I might be even wrong about this reality. I'd actually just genuinely
I'm
forget.
just amused that the interface thinks that one specific word I need it in a different language.
Yeah, and it's like you're not set. You haven't set your Facebook to whatever language.
No.
So what the fuck?
Like,
ugh.
yeah.
That's a terrible user
Awkward.
experience.
Uh-huh. Who programmed
Good
that
job,
shit?
Facebook. Thank God I'm only using React. That's actually one of their creations. Which is why we have some people very adamantly against it on a more
I see. Ideological
yeah,
ground.
ideological ground. I don't care for React on the ideological ground either.
Yeah.
What I do know is that there are no other tools that would fulfill our needs
That's all there is
in
to
that case.
it. Yeah.
So right now it's just it's used because it's the only thing that works properly enough for our needs. Not properly in general. Some people think that what it does is a complete abomination. And I can sort of see that if I hadn't had my hit me.
One more time.
I would see that point if I was probably younger and hadn't had my Rails experience as much as I had, because what my Rails experience taught me is that the less context you switch, the better. So that means you don't want to jump from your coding language, be it Ruby, be it JavaScript, be it whatever, and dive into SQL all of a sudden, and then dive back into your programming, because those are completely different paradigms.
Yeah. You want like an API, so you're just
One
coding
thing.
in one
Yeah, like
experience.
exactly. You like everything is, and JSX provides us with all of that. It provides us with the markup output. It provides us with all of the computational power of JavaScript, and with TypeScript, it provides us with practically everything we would need from a strongly typed language. So enterprise stuff. Some people also hate TypeScript for that reason. I just can't get behind most of their logic though. I respect it. I can't get behind it.
I just want whatever works.
Bingo. The more we fiddle with ideology, the less time we have to fiddle with actual working programs.
Yeah. Because I mean, a platform like this, for a social organization, you could socially organize a better platform, better components.
Hey, shit, man! If you had enough time in your hands, you could set up every component that I've been wishing for 10 years as being part of your platform, and I wouldn't complain whatsoever. But here we are, and the only components available to me to achieve what I want to do happen to be in JavaScript, happen to be going through TypeScript, and happen to be all of those things that go through React.
Yep.
Why? Because the world chose browsers as their fucking interface.
Yep.
Like that's just the reality of it. That's the operating system we have. We don't need to jump down to C and deal with fucking RAM addresses and any of that stuff. We just need to be clever about not fucking using up all the RAM on the machine. Because that's a dick move, to be
That's
honest. That's just a dick move onto itself.
Yeah. Reminds me of a time I created a script, a bash script, to take the contents of one file and add it to the end of another file, and then take that other file and add it to the end of the first one.
In
a loop.
Well, gee, now
So
you're just gonna.
the hard
eat
drive
up.
was getting filled, not
I did
too
this-
fast.
I
It was more the CPU, like the whole
I did the
server
same,
just like
I did the same thing, but with RAM.
was right on its knees.
So I created a loop that would create like 10,000 doubles, which is like the largest data type you can have in RAM. And so it would just like create the doubles, just forget that they existed, create another set of doubles, and just like constantly going. It took maybe like 5 seconds for the entire machine, Windows, to just like. Because Windows does not know what to do with a RAM eating machine.
Gets X
program.
over its eyes.
Linux, on the other hand, is like that fucking program is frozen.
Yeah.
It doesn't even let it through.
Hmm.
But that was like what 20 years ago now. That experiment would have ran when I was learning about C++. I was actually exploring what the fuck pointers were and like what the. Most of my knowledge is experimental, not merely programming wise, at least. It's very experimental rather than pure conjecture.
Coolidge.
Yeah.
So where were we? Social organization, platform,
Immer-
JavaScript,
the
reason
emer-
for
so-
TypeScript
So check this
and all
out. Check
that.
this out.
React, even though it's Facebook.
So yeah, those are all details that don't really matter to the core message of the podcast, if you will.
Yep.
What we covered was a new topic that was inappropriately brushed off to the side by me all of this time, and I should have probably run with it a lot earlier, and that is the emergence of guilds. So remember that the very first time you obtain the dashboard, you are getting it from a server, right? So your point of so at that point in time, you can have a purely personal dashboard that is self-serving only, native, whatever, doesn't talk to anything, doesn't whatever. You can obtain that program, sure.
You can start talking to yourself.
Right.
And weave a dashboard or
and
whatever.
and it will be basically the most useless variant of that tool, essentially. It's a note taker at that point, and maybe a program maker.
Yeah.
If it's a full-fledged dashboard.
Yeah,
the
like
way we envision
you
it.
should be able to basically like organize your own personal life, whatever
Yeah.
space you want, or
But that's not like the main attraction, if you will. The attraction will be like if you connect back to that server, right? Which gives you like the mediation guilds, and it connects all the other people that downloaded the program as a network that utilizes said mediation guilds. Then you're already bootstrapped into a community. It's the most rudimentary community. It's the fundamental guilds only, but it's the guild. From that conversation, the next set of conversations can happen. How will the people within this fundamental guild associate with each other? They'll start to naturally group into conversations. These conversations, the lot of them, will probably be where's the end to it? Probably isn't one. It might morph, it might change, it might switch people, but the conversation isn't ending. Those are like legitimate candidates for step this out into another lobby. So that should be like a click, almost like take this portion, now treat it as its own dashboard. And technologically speaking, there should be no difference in the way the code treats anything. It used to be a conversation, but conversations are dashboards, so it doesn't care.
I'm kind of imagining that whenever a new dashboard or a new guild is created, because it's emerging, it's coming because a lot of pieces are in place in other guilds and other, you could say, other space from which it emerges.
Yeah.
So operating within that guild, you would probably often have connectors back, like, or like the observer type setup, where something's like you're gaining resources to do this guild
Well,
from
yeah.
this guild or
If
that guild.
if from the fundamental perspective you never let go of the conversation, it's still happening within it.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's also happening within its own guild. So there's always a feedback back down to the more basic stuff, more fundamental stuff. So the
Mm-hmm.
main
Yeah,
conversation
that's
is
what I
actually
mean.
like a collection of all the guilds at the same time, which follows the exact trajectory we've been talking about. How like the association guilds will just flourish out into whatever its own thing, becoming its own
Mm-hmm.
dashboards, but everything feeds right back down through the fundamentals. And yes, you can have more than one server starting this off. So that doesn't mean that all fundamentals funnel through all and that it's centralized. It's only when the dashboards come together things get meshed together.
Yeah, and if you're creating a new guild, which is dependent on the existence of other structures or other guilds, in theory, I guess, through the program, you can you would be able to just duplicate that entire structure and take over management, if you will, of things that
Right.
are.
So from the technical perspective, like the more things change, the more they stay the same. So what's happening is that there is a conversation. It's like a flick of a button to say this conversation is now a dashboard, right? From that
Mhm.
perspective, like it's the same data. It's conversations and lobbies are already the same thing. So you have like that. You can just transfer what you already have, and just say it evolved into a new species, so to speak. It reached the level, and I think this is why coherence should be a part of that. I think only the conversations that don't have an end and constantly like become more and more coherent become their own contexts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like there could be an automated threshold of just saying treat conversations such as this as a dashboard.
Yeah, in the software, you would have certain things kind of get grouped maybe automatically and highlighted. It doesn't mean you have to say, okay, that is now a guild.
Yeah, it doesn't say you have to join this guild or that guild either. It's just like
Yeah.
this conversation is just so it that it's like its own dashboard at this point. It's over. It has the carrying capacity to like the what would you call it, the velocity. It has it's carrying enough velocity behind it to keep going on its own. Like it got bootstrapped.
Well, yeah. If you're talking, if you're
It's a
part of,
threshold
if your
thing.
conversation involves somebody else, and you want to keep coming back to that conversation, you need a way of referencing it. What for something to be referenceable, it becomes sort of an object on its set apart, right?
Right.
That you can address.
I've always said that conversations are distinguished from like typical chat programs by the fact that they have an ending. The off case where that ending is you cannot foresee it, right? Like the Turing problem.
Yeah.
There are certain conversations that don't have that kind of natural end. And even if they do, they might be restarted elsewhere with different groups of people. So
Mhm.
there's that resurrection idea, but also like keeping track of a more abstract notion that this conversation and that conversation, that these are probably reiterations of the same thing. They could be possibly consolidated into a single lobby.
Yeah,
it's weird to
and-
think about it because it's more organic than normal.
Yeah, the weird part is you're giving the impression of that there being like a central registry where this would happen. It's not necessarily like that, but the
Yeah.
existence of a dashboard which ropes together
And-
these conversations doesn't mean that it's really a thing.
So the central hubs that you're noting would be like the places of which any individual could download the program from, and by virtue of going to the same server, multiple people going to the same server, they have the opportunity to meet each other through that server. So it's just a meeting point that they could utilize at that
Mhm.
point. It doesn't mean that they can't download the program and go to a different server.
Or just turn around straight to each other, phone to phone.
Right, but we would want like the original starting points to already sort of bootstrap them into like at least connecting with somebody else who downloaded the program.
Mm-hmm.
At least they don't have to, but at least give them access to it. So like by default, you could say you start off on a server-based version of the application, unless you go into it and say, no, I want this kind of deployment.
There's a lot of details that come out when you try thinking in this sort of asynchronous Polonic paradigm.
Yeah.
Um,
Very few things start to make sense anymore. Yeah. At least in the traditional sense.
Yeah, and one of them is that idea of like a global state, right? Like this is the data versus agent centric kind of discussion as well. Just because I have created a dashboard that summarizes conversations we've had into one coherent thing, and that's how I refer to it, doesn't mean your client has to reflect that at all.
And this is why the mapping portion of my functional rhetoric is so why I keep going over this kind of stuff is because you don't literally have states, you have state maps. If you have a state that you're observing change into this structure, there's an algorithm that says change this structure on another end of the pipeline. So it's not like there is a permanent state, there is a hypothetical state and a bunch of responses to if it gets changed this way, do that. If it gets changed that way, do this. So you there is no quote unquote state. There is an imagined situation that's called state and responses to it.
Yeah. The state is like what's calculated in the moment.
Yeah, and it's all ephemeral. And that way you move away from the traditional notions of state where it's like, I have this variable, it has this value, and I know exactly what that value is, and therefore I need to make that calculation. It moves away from just reasoning about it that way. Like, no, you don't know what the actual value is. You need to respond to the changes in whatever state you might be getting. And you need to account for the changes in the state.
And so in this way, the dashboard is able to reflect more how humans operate in the world. In other words, we take in senses from the senses and we get events, like the light turned on or it turned off or something.
Have you ever played with Excel? Does your job involve Excel-like functionality at all?
No.
So in Excel, you know how you can make a formula cell?
Yeah.
So you make a formula cell that says this cell depends on my A1 cell is the sum of my B1 and
C1
C1
together is A1.
Together.
Yeah.
So as soon as you change B1, A1 changes. That reactivity, that's what I'm talking about. So it's like an inverse condition. Usually in code, you have your variables set to these variables, and if you change any of them, this variable does not get affected. In this setup, it's the other way around.
To me, that's you
set up a relationship. If you change anything here, it changes.
I think it's a more enjoyable way to program, like we were talking about in bite sizes,
so happy to
like
see,
chunks.
I'm so happy to hear you say that because it's actually way more difficult to reason about.
It's less arbitrary, and you know like the simple chunk, like this is waiting for that, and that's all. It just sits there and does that.
Yeah, ultimately it does reflect a simpler mental model.
Like it should allow you to.
But the build up is just that much more difficult.
It should allow you to think of a system in your mind, and then just start going after like tiny little bits of it, until there is a pile big enough that there's like the reaction happening between the elements, right?
Yeah, and you that's what you saw with Express, the new Express version of using that library. And I read the code, the guy that made that library. It's super thin. It's like such tiny little bits of additions of logic that I can actually copy in my own paradigms and give you guys further tools to just be like just react to this, just react to that, just react
Yeah.
to this.
Good.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I found a really cool tutorial.
Totally forgot to share.
Cool tutorial about how to build a chat program using the same paradigm. And again, it gave me like the nuanced sort of like understanding. It was like, how do you set up something that can be observed and subscribed to, and like that's all you'd want to do with your program. Like, where do I set up these observation points?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, it's literally like think about like setting up like an observation tower, and just responding to what it notices. So you don't change anything until something happens.
Right. Rather than your A1 is a button that you have to press it physically, and then it prompts you to enter the values for B1 and C1. And you're sitting there, you can't do anything until you type it in.
Yeah, like the entire process is frozen.
And then it's happy once
the
you've
entire,
entered.
like think about the entire process being completely frozen, and
Yeah,
just like your operating system can't even move forward
It seems
anymore.
like like maybe a dangerous way to program. I don't know, for like inefficiencies or just getting trapped or doing logical errors.
This is what the constraints are for, to guide all of that stuff through to a path that's actually very manageable.
Yeah.
Because that is a real problem, especially in the JavaScript world. The Node server actually runs single process, single thread. So that means if you ever block on like trying to read a file, every single request is blocked until that file is read. So you can't do that. You have to return what's called a promise and say, I'll ping you back as soon as I'm done reading that file.
Mm-hmm.
So that way the server can continue processing their other requests.
Right. Yeah, and that just makes sense.
That's how we operate. Can you imagine drooling at the fucking every blade of grass, and then you moved off of this blade of grass, you're moving to the next one beside it, and then over and over and over. Meanwhile, in the real world, you would have started, oh, there's a field, also there's this grass, this grass, this grass, this grass, this grass. Some of them you want to possibly bring into your visual perspective for whatever reason. You want to pick this one out of the ground or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like, I'm just using a shitty example anyway. But all of the other processes that you started, you're not actually bound to respond to their completion. Like, the first one that came back to you, you can respond to that and then forget about the rest. That's another point of async computations that doesn't apply in the normal stuff. You can literally forget about the computation if you don't care about it afterwards.
Right. Okay. So what are we doing here? What's happening, man?
Well, right now we're bringing together a bunch of standards in the web world into clear light. This is just how things are done. For example, if you are saving something, then you click and you move off the route to a different route, right? And you left the page, it was in the middle of saving it, right? You click back, then you click forward again, and the page is already, the actual data is already saved. Should the page display I'm still saving? Like, like the state has changed. How would it know to cancel the message at that point versus so something needs to happen between I'm saving and I've saved to say to the main client, hey, when you come back to this page, don't show this state, show that state. So there's all of these different kinds of interactions that have to happen in the front end that matter.
Right.
And you're more familiar with the back end interactions, which are more straightforward because they're more synchronous.
Mm-hmm.
So
that makes sense that you need that, though.
Yeah, that's actually the difference between back end and front end programming. Is that in front end programming you have like your interface running keeps running in memory no matter where you're going, back, forth, and whatever. So you have to respond to events in that timeline. So if something finished loading, by the time you come back to the page, it needs to know that that thing is finished. It needs to know it can refresh its data. It needs to know it's stale, it's not stale. It needs to know all of these things. That's front end state. That's your tactile stuff.
Right.
See how it's different from the more domain-based logic stuff, where it's like, if your message happens, you put it into a lobby. If it's it has to belong to a user. It's a very different condition ruled set. One is makes more sense for how the world is being touched. The other was making more sense for what the actual fuck is happening.
Yeah, well, it's a concrete and abstract.
And they both have
dichotomy.
states. They both have states. Sending, idling, whatever. Those are those states. Adding, creating, archiving. Those are those states. But they have a mapping between the two. This triggers that. That responds to this. It comes back. Like,
Right.
how does it know it's not idling anymore? Because this thing said, "Hey, I'm done," or sending, or whatever, saving. It says, "Oh, okay, I can save again because it told me I was done." So they keep messaging each other.
So another interesting part about this paradigm is that, like this holonic asynchronous paradigm,
Event driven.
if you want to update your environment, instead of having to go through this whole bunch of if logic or like linear type of logic, you just need to, like you said, probably identify what event it is that you're interested in, and then there's a protocol associated with that for what do you do when that happens. So
Exactly.
you're just adding,
All you say, "This happened." Figure
Yeah.
it out.
like, so let's say this happened and it wasn't in your program yet. All you have to do is, okay, the event is whenever this happens, then check this condition and execute some code.
And this ties it right back into another concept. What was it? Record of things done. No, that's not what we call responsibility, is it?
No,
It was
I know what you're thinking about.
it's the inverse of the normal meaning, where normally it means something like you're responsible for in the future, but this is more like it's a record of what you actually have done.
commitment.
Yes, record of commitment. So commitments is like what you've committed into the record. This plays heavily into that because if you think about it, those events, that's the record of commitment. Because if you think about it, if you fuck up the logic, right, but you still have the events, what you can do is you can rewind everything, fix the logic, run the events again. If that fucks up, rewind again. As long as you have the events happening and you record them, you actually get the record of commitments. And that actually allows you to recreate state in any space you want after the fact, so long as they capture all of the different changes that have been committed. That's the key there. Our system is going to record those events as the primary source of truth behind the source of truth it actually presents. So ultimately, the only thing ever getting recorded by the system are those events. And everything else can be
Supposed to be
recreated
static or constant.
and recreated from that point on. And that plays into, again, standard strategies in the enterprise world of how do you recover systems and all of that kind of stuff. How do you create redundancy and all of that. That's that.
Right.
So it's not just a willy-nilly idea. It's like, now our dashboard is not just going to be a crazy event sending thing. No. It's going to record those events, specifically the ones that created state changes, and be like, that's what is happening here. Like, everybody's going to be, it's transparent as fuck, is what I'm saying.
Nice.
And again, another flip in the mental side, which I'm sure you already had that revelation, but it's just worth repeating over and over and over again. lives in the URL. It lives in the event. It lives in the data that gets passed through the pipelines. That's where state really lives.
Yeah.
And the rest of the system is ignorant of it.
It's more, you're getting at more of a, I want to say, perceptive idea of a living process, like lightning shooting through the whole thing.
And it's literally how every GUI out there works too. So it's not a new idea in the sense of software either.
Mm-hmm.
It's just trying to move away from the typical linear-based understanding of writing code.
Yeah.
Into like, you're writing bits and pieces of code that is going to be contextualized later.
And it's just about isomorphism. Having things written, creating programming using language chunks that are isomorphic with natural processes on other layers.
So that, yes, that's like one portion of it. But the other isomorphism we really have to nail down is more technical, and that's bringing front end and back end into the realm of both client and server isomorphically, like really isomorphically. So we have to have both client and server running in server. We have to have front end and back end running perfectly on server. We have to have front end and back end running perfectly on client. And that's the isomorphic restriction.
Mm-hmm. And we'll take a short break. Shanya's still rambling on there. I like did a couple courses in college for like Java, but I've generally kind of hated programming, but it's more like, I don't know, just something I've avoided, you could say, learning. Yeah, but I appreciate the value of it and want to hop on board, help whatever I can, right? This paradigm to me is more interesting anyways. The kind of asynchronous, holonic type of architecture is just seems to make sense. So we shall see, but we'll take a short break. Here we're back. Yeah, we're just reading.
So I was just reading Ian's comment here, and just to like paint the picture as to how much Brian is suffering. He's on a programming actual technical level, not as far ahead as you are at this point. And so, yeah, I kind of badger him a lot with these concepts to the point of where I either destroy him mentally or we get to some sort of consensus at some point.
Yeah, like I was saying before, I have a history of kind of hating programming. I've had a history of anxiety associated with it. I just don't. Maybe it's from bashing my head against something, trying to get it work and like so many times.
Yeah.
Like the way I program is like hacking together big snippets.
Which is like everybody else who's not a programmer. That's how they program. That's like literally how they do it. They get their shit done and they don't care about any of the theory behind it. Or
I've
any
also
of that stuff.
been
And
exposed to it for so long in so many facets of it
You're
that
a bit jaded.
I do know concepts.
Yeah.
Like programming concepts. So like I have like an advantage there.
So I did want to qualify this a little bit, is that I also don't like leave it alone like I would with a lot of you, in the sense that like I'd say something and just like let you guys figure it out in some sense.
Well, it's part of the purpose of the development meeting.
Proximity wise, I just don't have access to y'all in the same sense. But Brian and I
I can't
talk
escape.
more.
I have nowhere to go right now. So
Brian and I talk more. So ultimately, what ends up happening is that I would go in like on these different tangents, but we would then have smaller conversations that bring the ideas back together in a more palatable sense, which is basically the only real reason I've been able to continue to push that way without it getting lost in the weeds and becoming like just me talking about programming. I would say that's a fair assessment, wouldn't it? B?
Sorry, I was reading again.
Because yeah, like Ian's right. They do require a lot of fundamentals, but I'm not trying to get Brian caught up.
What I'm saying
on
is
the fundamentals themselves.
I do have the fundamentals. Otherwise, how could I be understanding what we're talking about?
Yeah, but I'm saying like I'm not treating you like a peer programmer that is like, you know what, everything I'm saying you already understand and all of that stuff. Like, that's not happening here.
Well, it's better for this format anyways, that I can ask questions or whatever. It's kind of like other people can watch the video too. Right?
Yeah, and allows me to hone in on the way I explain something. If I don't explain it correct one way, tomorrow I'll be able to find a real explanation that makes sense.
I typically just keep trying to ground the context of the conversation, as in like, why does it even matter? Like, what part is this that we're working on? Like, why?
Yeah. So with the RxJS stuff, which is like the latest stuff, did you see an event system? Like something that captures an event and just like says, okay, I'm going to give my subscribers the next change to do, like the next command to perform.
Yeah, the language of an event, I guess, event domain, the domain of events, is that you have a listener, you have a cause, sensing, you have a medium, and you're sensing certain signals on that medium.
And things get pushed through rather than pulled by the running process, right? Normally like when you write a typical program, your running process pulls data from things and does stuff.
Yeah.
In this case, you have a situation where the main process pushing data to things and you respond to it.
It feels like that type of paradigm is more in line with like what we've been talking about, the nerve architecture.
Right, it sits there listening for inputs and response.
Because your body is kind of normally just sitting and waiting for stuff to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to, like, I don't fully see in my head the exact connection, but we have so many parts connecting across this like bridge of spectrum of layers.
Yeah.
Which there's
and
so
the body
many.
is just as complicated too.
And it just eventually you've got all the pieces together and it starts clicking, where you have this really isomorphic technological stack which is
Mhm.
which is like dancing with the being who holds it.
No, so not the four engines. We've touched on the four engines, but because of the minimal threshold idea,
Yeah, kind of
just
sprinting.
just to get something really really functional, but also enough to encompass the main idea, we've literally dropped all the other engines apart from conversation.
Right.
and
Start
and
at the bottom.
and,
sort
and
of.
more than that, like I dropped things like authentication and any of those kinds of different concerns that would not have anything to do with sending the message itself. So like literally, strictly speaking, it's like the most dumbed down version of a chat program you can ever imagine. That actually, like in that state, would have zero value in terms of usage. Just as a proof of concept for the different. Systems to connect to each other. All we're looking for is to prove, right, that if you send a message in the UI with its state changes, it can communicate with the main autonomous nervous system, do the thing there, which can connect it to its central nervous system, do its thing there, respond back through all of those layers, and create the message on the screen. So we're literally looking for the bare minimal proof of concept for the data going from one end to the other and coming back again, without any of the bells and whistles that make dashboard really.
So we're we're setting up the most basic nerve logic between the
Yeah.
types of nerves,
Yeah.
and having the ability for that to be like a stack,
Yeah.
a causal stack,
Just getting the technical
where
framework
just
together.
by sending a message onto the medium, which this fundamental whatever piece is listening, it can
Yeah.
cause reaction and reaction
Yeah.
down and then back up and probably out.
So what we want to do, basically, if you can pull up the, if you can pull up Telegram for a second to the latest image I sent for the message diagram thing.
Telegram.
I probably would have sent it to you personally.
Um,
Ian actually has
Which
that
diagram?
message, and it's on our GitHub as well. It's the latest version of the message diagram.
oh, it's got to be here though. I'm sure you must have posted it in the lobby.
Yeah, it might be outdated though.
Oh,
No, this is it. This is the latest version
Okay.
that I have updated it since, but it's not up yet anywhere because I only updated the code. So here we're talking about like the logic that exists in the
initiate a message.
this is the central nervous
You can
system.
create a message or retrieve one.
So zoom out a little.
Create. Oops.
Follow this. The if.
Archived.
Yeah. See how it says if? So these should actually be if created, if retrieved. The reason
Yeah.
the reason being is because you start out with start out in the initialized state and you can't change that. You have to, like, to use this library, you have to start out in one state.
Yeah.
You can't choose that. But what you can do is immediately, based on conditions, move to the next state, right? So that's what it's supposed to do. If you have an ID, for example, for your message,
Well,
you're retrieving it.
You're ensuring that
If you
that
don't
this
have
is-
an ID, you are creating it, and
this
you move
chunk
to
of
that state.
code is only being used in that type of live
Yeah.
setup with it's like a membrane type of setup.
Yeah, this is your brain. That doesn't have to exist unless something happened. So this would get created on the server. For example, if all of your
I
logic
like
is
that
on the
about
server.
my brain.
If this all of this logic is on the server, for example, right? None of this happens until you hit the button that submits the form. The form makes a request to the server. The server will then go pull out all the data that it needs to create the message for in the first place. Create this actor, like give it the context to live in. send this actor a message from the requests data, right? Have this actor figure out how to do all of its thing by moving through all of this logic, grab the end result, submit it to the database. If that succeeds, that will respond back from the server to the UI and say, hey, all of this was cool, update yourself. So the central part of the system collects the message initially, sends it off for processing to the diagram, right? It doesn't know how to add messages. It just says, I have a thing that says I need to add a message. Can you deal with that? And it'll deal with that and send events back to the central nervous system to actually make data changes. That's the thing it can handle.
I totally zoned out.
So
For the last half a minute, we'll say.
So hold on.
What part are you trying to describe now?
Zoom out.
I get that a message
Zoom out.
has a...
So whenever you go from gray box to gray box,
Yeah.
you're going through an event. Every event may or may not have an associated action involved. Those actions can potentially send events to other places in the systems. So whenever you go from one box to the next, this system will be able to send messages to say, hey, change this piece of data, change that piece of data, update this, update that. So so every time it switches state, it goes to the autonomous nervous system and gives it requests to execute changes on itself.
This feels like kind of like object properties.
Yeah, it should. It's like a hyper version of that.
Yeah.
It just makes it more evident. It's literally a way to make that reasoning work.
Well, this whole like state idea, state map, or what do you call it, is kind of like a living
actor. They're called actors, state machines.
Yeah, state machine. It's a map that's supposed to be mapping something that's alive and in constant process and flux.
So what it maps is event to state. So you're in this state, you get create event, you move to created state. You get validate event, you move to validated state. Each event carries data pieces with it. That data can be also used to initiate actions. So as you're transitioning from one state to the next, you can basically send out events saying, I'm transitioning.
What happens
I'm transitioning from here to here. I have this data to associate with this data.
What happens if your validate function doesn't return?
So you actually have a fork from the validation.
Yeah, but you're saying this becomes your state.
So you try to
you can be validated with a not valid validation.
Right. So you're in the validated state. The validation can be successful or erroneous.
Okay, that's fine.
So if you try to persist with a valid state, you'll go to persisted. If you try to persist with an invalid state, you'll land on the else, and you get errored. You get the errored state, which allows you to do another update. And with the update, you come back to here, which you can validate again.
That's weird.
So there's this is a fork here.
It would be nicer
if valid,
if
not if else.
If that errored section were on the other side of that line, this update line, you could have it going around this way and not have to cross.
Yeah, I did try to make it more pretty. This is as good as it gets for this one.
Confusing at first as to what that even means.
Just follow the arrows rather than your intuition about what arrows should mean. So look at this.
So just that dotted line, that's the only thing like that. And what it represents is like an if statement, basically. True or false.
So from the updated state, you can validate again. If valid, persist. If not valid, else back to update. So it keeps it in that. Keep fixing until you get it. Until the error goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you succeed, you persist again. So after you try to do your validation, you can only make one move. Figure out if you're valid or not. You do that by... I may have not represented it properly here. Remember, this is an attempt. This is not the final product. This is like trying to get it as close as possible to the ideals that I'm trying to discuss, without.
And this is what the message object or entity
Looks like in the central nervous system. So your interface does not see this. Your autonomous nervous system does not see this. The autonomous nervous system is like, I need to add a message. Can you like do that and give me back the result of whether I should or should not do something? So every time it switches from this box to this box from this box to this box, it has an opportunity to send messages back to the autonomous store to say, do this, do that, do this. And that at that point, that store can be like, I can't. For whatever reason, something changed, right? Like the assumptions have changed. So the autonomous system will be like, I can't actually commit the logic that you've calculated to myself anymore. Something's different now. Try again. Go back to the user, collect more information.
So you're saying this is central?
Central nervous system, but not the persistent stuff. So like all of this logic exists outside of outside of both the markup.
You persist in media, but so the central is here.
It sits in its own box and gets delegated to by events. So actors will be created, like a message actor. This is a message actor right there. It'll start to live, to wait for the message. It'll then get because it starts to live. It gets initialized, so it starts in that state, and then a message comes in and it says like, the message will be create. Oh, okay. I need to move to the create state.
Yeah. Okay.
Figure out if I can I do that.
So
should I do that? All of that stuff.
This you're saying like a couple minutes ago. This is representative of central nerve. This diagram.
Yeah, the brain part.
And so I was just trying to clarify on that.
But not autonomous.
The states themselves are sort of what's provided there. It seems like what is the valid state.
And this is per message.
And then these kind of things in between that's we're talking autonomous. These are protocols, things how to transform the data and all that. So,
all the way to get it to the persistent state.
So I'm just seeing a couple layers here. The boxes are central, or AKA archetype.
Yeah, it's allowing you to say
These
exactly what you need to do.
Black bubbles are more autonomous, AKA model.
Yeah. And they're also guides. Like you see, like they're guiding where the circuit goes as well. So you need a specific sequence of events to be a valid state transition to go through this, right? Like you can't just
and it kind of makes sense that in the archetype slot here, what's provided, like the central nerve, what it's seeing or providing is like, what is this perfect ideal that doesn't exist in the world exactly, but it's the perfect ideal state. So the state is you are created. It's like that is a 1, not a 0.
Yeah. And so it doesn't care about all of the in-between stuff. All it cares about is like, while this is going on, it might send it messages back to modify its own state, which could be legal or illegal, but that will guide it all the way through to what happens when you persist. And this actor is instantiated per message. So however many messages you have this many machines for each message. Do you see what I'm saying? Like if you have like a database, and the database is a table of messages, and each row is a message, however many rows you pull into the system is however many messages you have acting on each one. So each individual message will go through this logic and send events back independently of any other one. So they're asynchronous in that sense, as well. They exist as things in the system, sending messages back and forth.
So like, you can create and send a message in a conversation, a year later somebody can join that conversation and maybe see that
and
message.
That
So
message
it's-
will be in the state, in one
in
of
that
the states.
in that way you can see it as kind of a living piece.
So to this diagram, you can add things like this message has been read by the intended individual. This message has been not read by anybody. Like all of these different states could actually, and
Sure.
the message being read by somebody could be a transition from here to here, which will send a message back to the database saying this individual read the message. So as it lives, it has a chance to send messages back asynchronously to the autonomous system, which stores the data, retrieves data, and does all of that jazz.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the main storage space.
And
it just
that,
keeps
that
telling-
in itself seems like a metadata message.
Yeah, like I've been validated. Okay, I don't care.
Like, if I'm going to read this message, this particular message number 1001,
Right.
and I want to declare to the world basically that I can sign it cryptographically if I wanted to, and that becomes a message in its own, like I am stating I have read this message.
Yeah.
But that in
You would
itself
have
is a
another-
message too, which also propagates.
Yeah, you would have
right?
another state machine pop up to take care of that message, to persist it, to generally give it
Yeah, that's what I mean, yeah.
the pipeline that it needs to get stored as a message for the
Mhm.
next round of the system. This takes care of all
So
that. This
that-
validates all of that.
This seems to allow that message to have like a certain mechanization to it,
Yeah.
that when you store it as data, you don't have to, like, it becomes a functional living piece of stuff that it's
Yeah.
almost like installing a module into your software. Your software is going to continually react to the presence of that data, right?
And any
to
step
do
in bet-
functions, to
and
do
any
things.
and any step in between that from that data's inception point to its curation to its final form, so that it can be fed back into the entire system as an entire object, right? So, like if you think about this, in the autonomous system, really, like the whole add message stuff, it's simple: create, read, update, delete, right? So the interface bit, the tactile nerve, it'll be like, I have content, a send button was pressed, I am set up to communicate with this lobby. That's all it has. Like, this is the event. Content of message, the message is being sent, it's associated with such and such lobby. That's what the UI knows, right? The UI is not connecting to the central nerve. It can't. It can't know about it. That's one of the constraints. So what it has to do is go to the autonomous nervous system and be like, a message has been queued up, so to speak, for addition with the following content by the following user, for the following lobby, for the following conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? An event gets sent. This starts up an entire service from the autonomous system that goes like, okay, for these events, I need to connect to the central nervous system, pull up these configurations for it, send the events through that configuration system, and eventually, once everything is done, I need to collect all of the resultant transformations and report back to some extent. Notice how it doesn't know what the fuck to do with the message. It just says, I need to initiate my central nervous system with the following criteria for transforming this data. This is where the machine gets created by the autonomous nervous system. Messages from the current event get sent to it one by one as necessary. It figures out what to do with them. It transforms into different states and whatever. Each time it does transition from state to state, it has the potential to send messages right back. So the autonomous system that initiated the stuff can be changed during the process and respond to said changes. And then once the process is done, it can be like, do I want to commit all of this, changes from like where I started from, or did something else happen in between that prevents me from doing so? So not only is it like deferring the logic, it also has the responsibility of saying like, even after I'm done the logic and the logic is clean, good and clear and whatever, am I still able to even use it? If not, could I repeat the logic with the new data? Could I ask the user for more information? Do I just drop the whole thing and just give up? Like, there's like all of these things that it takes care of.
Yeah, I know.
So like,
in general, what you're talking about.
Can I add this message to my lobby? Does this person have the permission to add the message? Is this message like, you know what I mean? Like, we obviously don't have authentication at this point, but imagine we did. This is what it would do. It would be like, okay, this user does not exist in our system, and yet this is the origin of the message.
I'm reminded of constraint.
That can happen. Yeah,
constraint, because it seems like a way of programming that is simply you build with components. Those components can just sit there and do nothing. It's not hurting anything for a component to sit there and be there.
Yeah, but don't you violate their requirements? Like, that's the thing.
Well, that's all that it does. It would have requirements, constraints built into it. It's doing a certain action, but if you don't touch it, it doesn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
If you do suddenly have enough components to make some functional symphony, then they each speak up and say, I need this, and lo and behold, if all of that is provided, then you have a new thing.
Right. And at the end of the day, it's like, if this new thing is actually winds up being incompatible with a change that happened that started after the new thing started, but completed before the new thing started. So imagine you were in one state, you grab that state, you're doing your calculation, something else grabs the same state, does its calculation slightly faster, and it does it right after you. So by the time you come back with your results, you're not looking at the same database.
Yeah, but those results, I think, would come with metadata such as what version sort of of which data did I use to compile this, what was my ontology.
Yeah, and so the autonomous nerve has to take the responsibility of saying, okay, so we didn't land with the same assumptions that we started from. What am I supposed to do? Am I sending a message back out to the user interface to collect more information about the action? So for example, if you are an editor and you're editing a post, and somebody else is an editor and they're editing a post, and they've submitted a version just before you did, whose version gets used?
Yeah, so that's a question of like locking a file.
Yeah, and that's a question that goes out to the person, to the UI, right?
We don't want to lock a file. Essentially, it's impossible because we're in a distributed database that we're using. You have two separate complete databases.
Right. You can't lock a file in the traditional sense. So what you have to do is you have to ask the following question. For this piece of data, the autonomous engine has to be like, all right, does it make more sense to drop the whole thing and just error out, which is the simplest idea and it's where everything starts. But the other two options are, do we go back to the user, ask them to make a decision, and then use that?
Where possible.
Right? Or do we not need to ask a user, we already have a protocol for this, and just try again, or merge a certain way, or do this, or do that? So
like,
there's
let's
like all
say
of these different ways.
They were working on completely separate chapters in the same document, so you could automatically be like, okay, they were we'll merge both changes.
And this is like where we can use Git to actually comprehend what the fuck we're talking about. Because if you think about it, if you and I are working on a code base with Git, and we change two different files, and we both upload our changes, it doesn't have a problem with it. But if we change the same file, what it will do is the second person to do the upload is going to be asked, which version do you want to keep?
Yeah, that's easier because it is a centralized service.
Git? No. Git is actually in the non-centralized version of source
But I mean, a
control.
repository has a single view.
Yeah, but that's the same as having the database is being a single view. So whenever you have a database, it's like having a repository. That database couldn't be a mirror of transients.
Yeah, you're talking about probably how typically Git downloads. You're downloading your code base and then you're uploading changes. So you're copying the database.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, you have clones. So
Yeah.
when you're working with a repository in Git, you have a personal repository that's totally yours, and you have that repository that's totally theirs. And the whole idea of pushing and pulling and all of that stuff is not to say repositories are being pushed to each other. It's just to say this set of changes is now isomorphic over there, right? It's a way to grab pieces of change rather than dictate centrality.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
you ha- it is this decentralized, which is why it's easy to fuck up.
Mhm.
So what you do is you create a pseudo centralization by having a master repository.
That's kind of what I'm getting at, I guess. Then
But it's pseudo.
That's what I mean by it's easier because the Git website servers are the end arbiter of what is actually a version.
On GitHub. But
yeah, because
but the thing is
if
that-
you both download a repo and then you're both incrementing the version to the next version, you both think you have version 21 when
So-
20 is on the server.
check this. GitHub acts as a de facto website for Git repositories, but it's actually not set. Git itself is not set up to have a central website for repository. It's literally
Yeah.
any
Classic.
website. So you can set up GitHub-like service on your machine
Mm-hmm.
and just have like a folder dedicated to all your Git shit, and that will be your quote unquote most central repository. So you have a complete choice over that, at least. It's a de facto thing, and
So,
it's okay too because that's the
thinking
same thing that happens with the dashboard,
within the
where you'll have a de
context
facto server you download the app from.
of the dashboard of protocols, I would think like each protocol would have its own versioning system, like revision number. or
Yeah,
like-
yeah, that's typical.
because that's your type of object available, sort of. It's related to that, your ontology of the space of your garden or whatever.
I have not given versioning a whole lot of thought because it's been so time consuming to put the actual arbitrary different pieces together to give a scene for a protocol to happen in the first place.
To do versioning or in general?
In general, like just getting all the tech together
Yep.
to a point where something like versioning would even make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't even gotten to version 0.0.1. So for me to think about version 2
Yeah,
is kind of like
it's a bit of a weird.
I gotta tackle a few things first. And you know what's going to happen? It's going to be part of the URL. Here's the thing. Like, if you map all requests to URLs, whether they happen through a server or not, right? We can control for that because it becomes one of the parameters. So if your request is from V2,
Yeah.
that's going to trickle down into
Right.
the different.
Or like maybe not. Don't think about it as version 1, 2, 3, 4, but version signed with this key, version signed with that, like an MD5 hash, if you will, of the header of it.
Oftentimes it's in the header.
Yeah.
You would actually get a header that says which version of the API you're requesting for.
Right, but I mean, instead of thinking of versions as an incremental linear thing,
Yeah, feature-wise, you're talking about features. This key
Maybe.
contains feature XYZ.
Maybe.
The next key contains feature XYZ ABC. They're always expensive. They're never contracted.
potentially, yeah.
Until you have what's called
Be right back.
Check this out.
Okay. Yeah.
For isomorphism, the diagram of the message that we saw with the state transitions.
Yeah.
Did you pull it up?
Uh-huh. Thank you, Eon.
I think this will really help hone in the isomorphism bit.
Okay, what
I
about
will respond to Eon as well. I just don't know what it is yet.
No, he just forwarded this image.
Ah, yes, it's actually the same one we've been using, so it's I have managed to update us on time.
Okay.
So check this out. You remember my distinction between client and server?
No.
Browser and an HTTP server specifically?
Yeah.
So check this out. On the native side, if this was the case, you click a button to send a message. This state machine materializes within the confines of the said client,
Yeah.
within its JavaScript, executes,
Yeah.
sends results back to its interface, and it just completes the loop there, right?
Yeah. So up to a certain point, these like create and retrieve function or protocols are gonna be the same up to a point.
Mhm.
And then it'll fork off as in, does this have to go over the internet literally to
Yeah,
be
that which would happen way before this point. So even if it forks off to go to the internet, you lend in a server. The server is going to start processing the request. What it will do is it will create a temporary environment for that request that would mimic the thing that the client would have had in the first place, do the exact same
Yep.
logic, and take the end result, fabricate a response out of it so that the client will know what the fuck happened at the end of the day. So this is the
or in the morning.
yeah, but this
if
is
it's in
the
the morning.
this is the isomorphism
You
that I'm
shouldn't
trying
have to
do.
wait till the end of the day.
You know, yeah, that was more of an English thing.
Okay.
But my point is that you have the exact same piece of logic literally running either on the browser or on some server somewhere, and it doesn't care.
Yeah.
All it
that's
knows
great.
is that a button was clicked. The button click meant this, and the following. This, and the following happens either in the client or in the server
And
or between the
if
two
I
of them.
may just kind of bring this all home a little bit, the reason why we need the server functionality to be ubiquitous, in other words, it can be run anywhere, potentially, the ability for that is this gives us potentially control over our data, over our experience, our digital world, in that we don't need to always go out to a server on the cloud to do something. If we're there, fine, but at any moment we could press a button, download the entire structure, and clone it local. And to having this ability is extremely important.
It makes the network literally a tool at your fingertips rather than the necessity of the tools at your fingertips.
Like to me, to me, this sort
It's a
of
reverse.
architecture is isomorphic with the internet itself, whereas
intention
the
of the
client
internet, yeah.
server model is not. It's like a side path.
Right.
It's not the main path.
It's not even. It's a very what you call it free path. The client server path is like the easiest to achieve because it doesn't have a lot of friction. It doesn't have a lot of input. It doesn't have a lot of investment.
We could say responsibility is
Yeah.
like
This is a different path.
anybody
entirely,
who's
yeah.
tried setting up their own server to do anything knows a little bit about
Like
that.
as soon as you set up a server, DDoS attacks. What the fuck?
Yeah.
So, by the way, that throttling thing that you saw, great tool. Like just to, like, what was it called? Debounce function that basically introduces a delay between the time you're able to respond to an event. Like, that is such a easy to use way to describe of what happens if you're hit so many times a second and what to do with that situation, straight up with like, okay, pipe my request, debounce it so many times, do this, do that, authenticate it, sure. Divide it up by the different people that are interested in the. Like you can divide each request by its administrative roles, right? And then that can go through different paths and logic. Can be recombined again in the end.
Mm-hmm.
There's like so many different ways you can do with a push model by just saying,
I don't really get it, but it sounds like that function is protecting you from spam.
So check this out. Yeah, it is in a sense, but check this out. So it is up to the pusher, right, to
God damn.
to dictate how the process will continue, right? And if one of the operations in the pusher is such that is like, I'm just going to hang around for at least a second before I do anything else. Right? It's just like they're not going to be responsive for a second. So what you can do is basically swallow up all of these requests to go into absolutely nowhere until the condition is met, and then you continue again. So you can basically like cut off your input for seconds at a time from basically reaching anywhere in your system.
Yeah.
So yes, your server is getting hit, but that request is just like hitting the least amount of RAM possible. It's just like it goes nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you can do with these pipes. You can delay them. You can wait. You can do this. You're asynchronous, so you don't, and you're not blocking anything. So you can literally delay the time before you even hit the next step.
You're talking about facilities for asynchronous programming because I'm assuming it comes with its own problems, like what you're describing. The ability for so many senses to come in so fast.
That you fork each one to its own calculations, so you don't have to like wait for any one of them. You just wait for all of them to like, do their own thing. And if they fail and they disappear, you don't care. You just keep moving with what you have.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it seems like there would be a lot, potentially maybe even the majority of messages just get hit like with nothing into a wall.
So try to reverse the logic into the traditional way of trying to accomplish this, and it's like, wow. Here, all you have to do is just not respond to an event for a while. Is my time up? No. Is my time up? No. There, it's like, all right, I'm getting a request. Who's the request from? All right, what's the timeline? Do I decide to respond to it now or later? Right? Like none of those decisions are going to make it into the newer server API that I'm thinking of. You don't have to worry about that.
All right, so
you just say delay, delay the message.
So how do we proceed from here?
What
are we building?
Proceeding from here, I think the main trajectories would be like for you guys, like who I call my front end persons for the time being. Markup. We proceed by creating the ubiquitous page. So the thing that has the main tag, the thing that has all the proper header tags, the meta tags, the proper script tags. I'll take care of that part, don't worry. Then we're going to be like, what's inside the main section? That's the list of messages of the lobby.
Yep.
So the actual chat. And then we need a text area, a button to send. We need not a state machine of this style, but a state machine of this style to describe the logic of the interface. So when you click send, for example, you need to clear out your text area. You need to capture the logic and make sure that it gets sent to the proper event handler, right? The thing that's observing the clicks. It then needs to go through a situation where it's the same logic as server and client. I'll start with client, but we'll move it to server afterwards as a proof of concept because both have to work.
Yep.
To do that, it's going to run through all of this logic, and eventually, once I get the persisted state, we're going to have connecting events from I want to create this message with this information, run through these states, give me back my data updates through your transitions. And the only transition that really makes sense is persisted, because the persisted transition is the only one that saves data back to the database.
Uh-huh.
Once we have that, that's going to be an event. We're going to record the event itself. This is what's being persisted, and then we're going to run the event and persist the data. And once the data is persisted, we're going to update the UI to show the persistence. So the message is going to pop from the text box onto the message bubble.
Great.
So that's what's involved.
Okay. So that's our, what do you call it? Not an MVP.
Empty.
Empty.
Like emptiness.
Yes.
Which is why I also like it. It's cringe but also fun.
Yep.
Empty is just like minimal threshold.
Mm-hmm. To get something done. So in our case, it's sending a basic message in a lobby.
Yeah. It's more of the proof of concept of the nerve system than it is of the actual chat system itself.
Yeah. Right. This is just the most basic feature or function of the chat side to test the thing all the way.
Yeah. And what we want to do is witness the message itself go not only from the interface to the persistence layer requesting the logic to be persisted, so to run through this machine. We want to see the results back from that machine. We want to see the machine ask the persistence layer to actually save the data.
Yep.
And we want to see it go through all the notions, because right now it's in RAM. Remember, Redux works
so it's
from
like
RAM. So
validate and then commit and then like the concrete.
Yeah, and once you commit, it has to take it, put it into its RAM, take it from its RAM to its caching system and say, hey, I got updated. Go update the actual persistence layer from that, wait for its response, and then be like, oh, that failed or that succeeded, and be like, oh, I finally am able to actually store the data. So it has to go through the entire cycle. Oh, it was gone for a while.
Oh damn.
So we would actually have to watch the database get updated as well.
Yeah.
And from that, we would actually want to see the sync database on the server also reflect the data. So we don't want just because we're not trying to create the perfect native client yet. We're actually just trying to make sure that from a centralized server perspective, everything is working, so that we can take care of sessions much more readily.
Right.
Then we will evolve it into something that's more isomorphic across the two. So the thing that we build on the server has to work on the client.
What is the architecture like here? You said React. That's the router it's called, which kind of keeps like a live presentation going on the browser as to what changes are happening in the background.
So React deals with transforming markup written in JavaScript, that JSX stuff. React is responsible for transforming that into real markup on its end of the pipeline, incorporating your logic.
Okay,
incorporating logic.
My question more is once the message, say object or whatever, is persisted, that means it's in a database.
Mm-hmm.
It's got the go ahead and it's propagating. That's kind of importantly. It's propagating in the system.
So there's going to be a change.
At what point
changes,
does your list of chat log actually receive that new object?
I was about to hit
How
that.
does that?
I was about to hit that. Logic. So what happens is that because of the way CouchDB actually works, is that your local database client will have a call made to it, say, I'm listening for changes.
Specifically, this type of change where a message has been committed or persisted.
Well, no, you don't get that kind of granularity. What you get is like my database had an update, some document has changed, or some document has been inserted, or some document has been deleted.
Yeah. Is this a special feature of Couch where it's
Pouch, yes.
Pouch? It's trying to listen for things
Yeah,
happening,
it's
like
like
events.
it's part of its interface.
Okay.
Yeah,
That
it's
makes
like
it kind of special. I'm assuming.
built in. Yes, it's literally why it was chosen.
Fuck, why is that special? It shouldn't be special.
It's one of the the first. So it's an Apache project that
So, like,
that decided to take HTTP
in
to
my
its,
in my
to,
mind,
to
this
its main to
this
its best capacity.
this platform that you could say we're putting together, whatever platform, paradigm,
It's a hodgepodge of
is-
things that exist.
is that's great. But if we have our way, let's say with dashboard and how what it's capable of, society could end up being programmed like this. Like this will be the way to do it. Never mind any organization tools or any project management software. It's all bunk.
It's the app. It's the app to app. So, if on your phone, whatever app you click in ends up being yet one more version of the dashboard that just configured differently.
Yeah, right.
That's the goal.
That's the size of the platform, the scope of it.
It's every app, for sure. But no, it doesn't get to be every app just like right from the inception. It gets to be like the bootstrapper.
Right, and we're bootstrapping with a dashboard software meant to create guilds and
Yeah.
share protocols type stuff.
Yeah, and the vast majority of what I went over isn't
Have conversations. Have
isn't
emergence.
that the vast majority of it is like how does that work both on your client and on the server without being different, right? Like
Yep.
a button click to send something should be technically the exact same logical
Yeah.
process
And
to
that's
hit that
big, that's a
message
lot.
to hit that message thing.
I'm glad that you say that.
So like all of those get posts, patches, requests that you see on the internet to the server should map technically to a button click on the client.
If you ever look into like decentralization or the culture of decentralizing, disintermediation,
They lack the isomorphism.
responsibility. Of course, yeah, of course, but
between server and client specifically. I'm not talking
I'm
ideologically.
saying ideologically, the decentralization community, you could call it, understands this and appreciates this software paradigm that
Yeah.
we're talking about
Yeah.
inherently.
Yeah,
like,
they
I'm saying
would.
the true community, not where
Okay,
shit
yeah,
gets
but that's not
effed up.
that's not an ideal
I'm
community.
not talking about the effed up.
Yeah, look, because the actual communities out there tend to try
Like
to
Bitcoin,
reinvent
for example, as if Bitcoin is the
but they're
solution.
trying to reinvent the wheel. Like that's like why JavaScript and not why Holochain. It has nothing to do with say playing into Anders' concerns. I have my own concerns.
About what?
Like why not Holochain? Why JavaScript? Why
Is it
why
actually?
Pouch?
Do they make their own programming language? I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
They made their own programming language. They made their own database standard. They made their everything their own, and then they're expecting people to just sit there and spend their energy adopting it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
That's like literally why I never went that route.
Mm-hmm.
If your entire system is based on telling people
Yeah.
to just do this,
That's actually a bit crazy when you put it that way, because the existing technological stacks that are out there in deployment, vast majority of places,
they're working.
is working, stable, beautiful.
Nobody's going to change them. Nobody's in the right mind is going to like literally shift a paradigm for some.
It's a bit of a disaster in the waiting. If you think about it, if Holochain or whatever took off, mass adoption overnight, you'd have disaster. Like if trust was started put into the system and it scaled up like that fast,
Yeah.
because it's all new.
So rather than doing any of that, we're trying to solve the holonic problem first with using all of the isomorphisms that we can, and then we can potentially take everything that we get as the output and do all of our encryptions and do all of our validations on top of that. Right? As a overarching concern between the communications of the systems themselves. Why in the hell are we
Right.
building?
Yeah.
Would we build
Like a whole new technological stack.
Yeah,
Brand new.
why in the hell would we build any of that onto like into existing systems in such a way that makes people not adopt it in the first place, and then
Right.
ask them very nicely to please do? No,
Yeah,
you
no,
don't do
this-
that.
that
That's
makes-
not fucking
That
working.
makes sense.
And I'm not trying to like play the card like I know better, but like, come on,
Mhm.
when have you seen this work? Like, really?
Well, it's really kind of the opposite. It's
You
we're
get
assuming the
backlash.
collective intelligence knows better, as in what has been chosen right today. What are the standards?
The repetitive pattern that I'm seeing is insanity because you always get just backlash. Backlash, 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 backlash.
We're trying to do our your own fiat.
I mean, we're going to get backlash, but
Even
in a very
the
different
language
way.
of Portal Mountain, has it been received well, publicly? Not often.
Again, it's because it is different, but that's fine. Like there is some battles that are worth having. One of them is that the reason the Portal Mountain language exists now is because it doesn't. The language that existed before it doesn't cover the bases that were necessary to cover to begin with.
Yep.
That's like literally its only reason for existing to begin with. Try to figure out how to put the word dharma into English, because you can't. Which is why we have model.
Yep. Or like, also, even the idea of myth and what its actual function historically has been, and the inherent reification of it. Like that's just part of
The inescapable
the normal
the
alignment
reification of it.
the normal alignment of the cognitive window.
That there is a mythology to consider in the first place.
That there is one.
Like even in the secular world. For
So
example.
to realize that there is always myth being reified.
Yeah, and what is meant by
is-
myth?
Right, in a meta generic sense, is often taken as being in conflict with this specific myth or that specific myth, right?
Yeah, but that's not what we mean by myth, right?
But you know what I mean.
I know what
What
you
I'm
mean.
getting at.
I was just trying to say.
It's like
when
the
we're
meta discussion isn't allowed because it's seen as an attack to weaken the reality of a particular myth, right?
Yeah.
The reification of it.
Also, the overarching idea of what myth is supposed to be is simply supposed to be the story you believe. So when you hear a sentence, when you hear a phrase, when you hear an idea, when
Right.
you hear anything,
I believe you're
myth,
talking about language structures right now.
Myth is what informs the meaning of that sentence. Right? Like myth is the story behind the story, the story you're being told right now.
That languages exist
So
as big collections of words that we all share.
So there's a secular myth, for example, like the Big Bang and all of that stuff. If you take that entire story as your context, right, you will judge the phrases that you're given based upon that story. We're not talking about whether it is rational, whether it's not rational, whether it's this, that, or the other. We're just talking about how, like, contextualizing phrasing and everything else comes back to another overarching story that we call myth. So, in other words, myth guides meaning to everything that's being stated. It's not like a spectacular story out there. It's more like a functional narrative that informs the rest of
It's kind of like the
your-
reflection of archetype, of like a hero, but the myth is a living, that there's a life to that story and it's enacted in you potentially.
Right. another way to look at myth is like that server example I showed you. Do you remember how it was like authenticate first, group by people's IDs, throttle by ID, combine all of the requests to the same response structure after the fact. So it split some listeners into groups, gave them their own criteria, combined them back into each other, and then fed them through the same algorithm at the same time. That's what myth is. It's like this group. It's the thing that takes the event, transforms it into various things, and combines it back into like what is the final outcome.
Mm.
So the final outcome is that some people cannot answer faster than a second in this case because they've been throttled individually. So that you see how like the pipe creates a myth of saying like split everybody up by their ID. Treat everybody by ID as a throttling group. So aka single users. So everybody's in a group for themselves. And
right.
And at that point, recombine them all, and once they've passed through whatever thresholds they have to, give them the response that they've been seeking. Hello world. So
beautiful words.
So yeah, look, I'm trying to like capture like what you were saying about protocols. It's like how it's like constrained and fed through and moved through. Like that's how our system is behaving. So it's open up to receive whatever event, but as it chugs through the event, it has its own constraints.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just
which
kind
is its own pipeline.
Thinking how it seems like it could be a noisy system sometimes. Like if you're an impatient application and keep wanting to check a lot, there could be a lot of just kind of...
Experience will say this is the reverse situation. If you end up being too overwhelmed by that and you start to cater to that, you end up with a noisier system after the fact. Because at the end of the day, you're building so many constraints that you reduce the noise.
Yeah, you're talking about like making correct requests that can be fulfilled because you've already tested it through the logic, your own local logic. It should be checked and validated there too. It's going to be fine.
And remember, like all you're talking about is like you're working with a single value in a sequential manner. So you can reason about it in the old style of programming, right? But then you need to break apart all of your statements and say, I should not temporally depend. I should not like hang my process by trying to figure out this part, by trying to figure out this part, by trying to figure out this part. So instead of using the pull system to do that, this is where you introduce your push systems.
Mm-hmm.
Where in places where you would not want to wait or block or hang the process up, which becomes a technical decision, obviously.
You kind of just like hang a hook somewhere and it just sits there waiting for you.
Yeah.
But you have to define that hook, what it's waiting for, listening.
So your first tool is to basically go, okay, it's like a single value. All right. Single value, I usually can send parameters to a function. It can calculate my single value. I can get it back and continue. All right, reverse the process. Introduce your calculation to a weight for the single value, and then introduce your next computation as to what happens when it arrives. Chain it together.
Yeah.
So that you're not stuck waiting on the process itself.
Yeah, that's what I meant, I guess, that you have to define what it's listening for and how it's going to react. Yeah. What do you do with that data?
First, proof of concept, do it the usual way. Make the algorithm work.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you do with the data. Once the algorithm works, reverse the push-pull situation, make it more complicated basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then our next step is, okay, this was for one value. What happens if it's 0 or infinite values? By that point, the calculation for the for the single value should already apply to the multitude of values. So even though the actual accepted code base is going to be that strict, the approach to it is going to be far more loose and a lot more like, okay, let's get this working. Let's get this working in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get it working for multiple
Yeah,
values.
it's a logical 1-2 step.
1, 2, 3. Because one value to multiple values is another jump.
No, I mean like first get it working in a linear fashion, and then do the async or in a synchronous fashion, and then switch it to async.
Because the sync version was going to give you the visual of like how the algorithm is working. You put values here, you get values back. Okay, take that thing, stick it into your stepwise process. As soon as you get a value, this is what you do with it, and output another value, make that into the next async step. Read your next line. Oh, it changes that based on this change. Reverse the connections and say, okay, and once I get fed that value from the previous step, I produce this value. What you're gaining by this is like you're separating the steps from being synchronized to asynchronized. So that won't matter what point in time the next value becomes available. It's just the calculation fulfilled itself.
It's because like that listener process has the piece of code that would need to proceed to the next step.
Yeah. And that's why you like in the promise syntax, you see a code like that says dot then, dot then, dot then, dot then.
Yeah, like when. That's when the event
Yeah,
happens.
so as soon as the response is fulfilled, so if you say send out an async request for web from the web for a JSON information from a server, right? You're in your browser and you're like, I want some information from my server. I don't want to hang my entire process waiting for it. So what you do is then, okay, once I get that information, can you please update my interface to look like this, this, and this based on that data that you received? So all it's saying is like, can you promise me to do that? And then the next step is, I'm going to observe you, and any time you actually do a change, I will fix myself. So the first version is like a once only, once off. Can you promise me to do something? And if it succeeds, you do something in response. The second version of that is like, can you promise me to inform me of any time this happens? So an event listener, a button click over and over and over again is different than the page rendered once. Different events. You can't have the page rendering more than once. You can have the button being clicked more than once. So one is a promise. That'll happen as soon as I'm finished. The other one is like, every time I'm finished, I'll let you know. So it keeps feeding it over and over and over again. That's the difference. Multi-value, single value.
The difference between what again?
There's two different aspects to the push model. One is the one-off, the single value.
Yeah.
I promise.
And what's it called? Promise?
Yeah.
Versus what?
Observable.
Oh, yeah.
So the observable, you observe over time. The promise is like it's a once-off. It promised you something. It'll do it.
Yeah, that's fine. Observing implies over time.
Yeah,
whereas a promise doesn't.
Constant state. It's part of the state.
Promise gets triggered at some point.
So in this way, the program state is ephemeral. It comes through events, but the setup of the program itself is a state to itself. So it's like who's observing what. That's the state. That's the state of things, right? Like when your program gets set up, who's connected to what and what channels events from where, all of that stuff is its own kind of meta state, a circuit. And as you know, a circuit is besides the point. Like you've created your pedal circuit, right? It itself is its own thing. It got its own abstraction layers and the way it works. But the point of all of it is, when you press this pedal, that happens. When you press that pedal, this happens. When you press this pedal, that. There's another program on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're getting at with this description. So there's like these observable running observables,
Right.
that you keep listening for, and based on what they're reporting is where all of the events get triggered.
And this is
all of the
making a
logic.
state machine, which is a representation of the world around us, potentially.
Well, the event itself can set up a bunch of state machines, let them run, figure out the end result, shut them down, send the end result back up.
You ideally
if it's the server, for example,
somehow would have sensors to sense the world, and those could become your conditions.
At the end of the day, the program, whether the state machines, whether they run on the browser or whether they're running on the server, don't give a shit. All they care about is that they're inside their own ontology. They're able to respond to a number of events. It doesn't care like whether the events are being sent from a server, from a request, that just like duplicated the request object into this event, that event in sequence, or whether you have all of this living on the browser connected to your buttons already, and as soon as you click the button, it does all of the state changes through RAM on that system. Like, it shouldn't give a shit whether it's like it's been alive forever interpreting those events, or it's just like got spawned up by the request, did its thing, got shut down after the fact, after the result has been extracted. The lifetime should not matter to the state machine. The state machine should just like be like, in this context, this is all I do. So if the server sets up the context the same way as the client, it doesn't give a shit.
It seems like just almost a philosophical question, like, does the conversation ever end? Is there really truly an end to any conversation?
Well, you notice the machine doesn't care about which message it is. It's about any message. So it can be instantiated over and over and over and over and over again to represent a message that's in flight, a message that's been archived, a message that's been read before, a message
that's what I mean. Like, how even if you say that a conversation has ended, it's still influencing other things. Like, there's not really a chop-off point.
Right, so it's not talking about a chop-off point. It's talking about, like, if you read the conversation in a database and you read a message, you can instantiate the state machine again, and it's going to be a retrieved message. You don't have to preserve it again or persist it again. You don't have to validate it again. It's just in its... the machine is not like in its end state or anything. Like, you're not doing further things with it. But you can read the information that it brings up. It's like, oh, I can read the message. Okay, I'm in this state. I've retrieved the message. The state machine is like, I'm in a retrieved message state. So it knows the ID, right? So because it's in a retrieved state, it also knows what the content of the message is, because to transition from initialized to retrieved would have pulled up the content. That's just what the transition means, right? So by the time you're reading that machine, it's going to give you the stuff from the database, from your autonomous stuff, but from the central perspective. as to what it means to retrieve a message from
Yeah, it's
the
nice to
autonomous
have
system.
all of that.
And that's what gets fed back to the
abstracted
tactile.
away, so you don't have to think about a lot of things like programming. I think it feels like it may be easier when you have this ability to really well describe the whole environments, the stack of environments, so that you can just abstract them away and speak only one simple language.
Yeah.
And get things done.
Yeah, and it's kind of like almost impossible to stress this point, but it needs to be like literally taken on faith by this point, by like you, Eon, and Honorous. Honorous? Yeah.
Sure.
At this point, and it's like the explanation stuff is really complicated because it fits all of these different libraries, different ways of doing it specifically. But the conceptual parts, the parts that we're going to tackle as a team together, the bits and pieces that all of us do care about as far as making messages, conversations, and all of that.
No way.
Those parts.
I had it on mute for a while.
That's fine.
Damn.
Those parts, they'll.
Oh wait, did I? Or no, I didn't. Oh, I scrolled down. Never mind.
So those parts
I think
are
I
going
didn't
to
have
be,
it on mute.
those parts are going to be very much tackleable by all the novice programmers that we have amongst us, because it's not going to be building the pipe, if you will. It's going to be building those little tiny functions that run between the pipes. You get this value.
Yeah, more protocol.
You need,
because the pipe
to
again is
derive that.
archetype. It's like perfect type
Yeah.
of thing.
and what I keep trying to say is that I'll build the pipes. I will need you guys to give me the
Well, this is what you would expect from
smaller parts
from this
in
the
between
dashboard
them.
tool, to be able to give it to any community and say, okay, now you guys input how your community works.
And
That's what you're asking for.
And between the four of us, that would be the proof of concept of like how actually that can work. Take one of me, your architect, if you will, and I am making an architecture, so clearly I can handle the bits and pieces that I need to be authoritative over.
Mm-hmm.
But my
Nobody questioned you. It's okay.
And the success isn't based on like how clever I am. The success is based on the fact that you are all capable of you literally utilizing this architecture with your limited capacity to build in the pieces that the pipes are using. Because if I'd done that, if I've made that clear, that nobody's confused as to how to build the other pieces,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah, that's
It's going to build
the
itself.
Ideal,
It's
the
going
goal.
to build itself.
The goal. It becomes like a platform. It becomes a language. It becomes something that
And
can
it
be
becomes-
utilized.
It becomes a validation point for what the fuck I'm talking about as well. Not from the personal perspective, but it can be done.
Yeah. Well, in our, I think
it is from a personal perspective because, like, holy shit, if it can be done, I'm fucking like all of those thoughts, you know.
oh, they weren't for nothing. Anyways, we'll take a break and be right back.
between our architecture and this architecture, and is that your tactile stuff goes through your spinal cord first, then that hits the brain to say, hey, what's up with that? And then it incorporates what the brain tells it together from the tactile senses at the same time.
Yeah.
So it has access to both.
You're talking about like
So
going through the APS.
Reversing of one of the layers. So they're putting the brain logic before it hits the persistence layer. We're saying no.
Yeah, I get it.
Hit the persistence layer, have it mediate what it wants to do with itself. That gives you the logic back, and it will do the rest. So it's like, it's almost introducing another step between the layers.
Mm-hmm.
Same layers.
Anyways, it's about time to get out skis.
Damn it!
Pardon me, but yeah, it totally is that time. So, gonna call it a night, and
Have you
great meeting.
Have you had
Good
any
times.
worthwhile insights to share before we depart? Have I done any successful relaying of information?
I don't know. I suppose
That could be useful to our audiences. That could be summarized in some sense, maybe. We can take an extra 5 minutes. It's okay.
No, we'll see. I have a history, like I said, of aversion to programming in general, but at least the architecture here makes sense with what we've been talking about for years now with the model.
Yeah.
That technologically we can also reflect a lot of those concepts. So that's what's easy for me, because I understand like the holonic model.
You understand
So
getting.
I can
I
see
have
the
a value.
reflections in the choices of how things are built,
Yeah.
architected. Yeah, but anyways, I'm gonna pack her up here, so we're gonna call it. Any final?
No, I
Hoorahs.
mean anymore, and I'm just dragging it out.
Yeah, good time though. Good
Yep.
meetings, and we'll see you all next time.